Time for some more illogic. Last time we went over a week 1 match against Chad and his always dangerous Seattle Steamrollers. Please go check out the video first if you've not done so already, as we went over the Teambuilder and battle in which, spoiler alert, the Bouffalant started yet another Season 1-0 after a solid 3-0 victory off the back of our mid-tiers, mainly Swampert and Arcanine. This time we've got another huge threat in Steve Chuck and his Waterdeep Wobbuffets. Timestamps will be in the description. If Chad isn't our biggest rival, Steve's makes a compelling case as well, boasting the first victory over the Bouffalant in our regular draft seasons after taking me down at week 2 of Season 6. He's also responsible for what is probably our most embarrassing loss in draft, blowing a game to Galardarm after dominating the whole rest of the game. I'd like to think we got that Ice Monkey off our back after, despite losing both regular season matches to him in Season 9, we defeated him in the semifinals of Season 9, and then again in a clutch match in Week 4 of Season 10, one of my favorite draft matches I've ever played, thanks to Guzzlord. He plays me consistently well, so let's see what he's got to work with. Crobat at the top, tying our top speed tier as well, followed by Starmie, Terrakion, Thundurus-Therian, Haxorus, Drapion, Milotic, Heatran, Tapu Bulu, Morgrem, and Trapinch. Like Chad, he went top heavy with only 2 tier 20s, but those top picks feel very different to Chad's. The Steamrollers were a balanced pivot team with 1 or 2 breakers, the Wobbuffets feel like an offensive team with 1 or 2 pivots, and the rest being breakers. Where Chad's Kyurem stood out as a monster that is impossible to wall with a bit of longevity, Steve has Thundurus-Therian, Terrakion, and Haxorus that all simply mow things down and not much else. I cannot knock the defensive core either though, of course. Tapu Bulu Heatran is a combo as old as time, or at least Gen 7. They complement each other so well, and pieces like Milotic and Crobat have a great symbiotic relationship with them too, supporting them and being supported by them. Tough to find spammable neutral moves against this team, and Grassy Terrain recovery only makes it tougher. Going over what I should expect in the matchup, Trapinch does just about nothing. It traps very few of my team members, none of which are weak to first impression, and Earthquake is decidedly just okay into my squad. It will not come, and Morgrem probably shouldn't come either. I've mentioned that teams seem to bring screens a disproportionate amount of times to matches against me, but it seems as though last time Steve brought screens against me it didn't go too well, considering that's all Morgrem does, along with possibly Prankster T-Wave, maybe a cheeky trick or something like that. I'm not particularly confident it will come. Drapion seems just as disparable for him, Knockoff not being the best move against me, and Drapion in general not doing enough against really anything on my team to be worth it. As a pivot, it gets 2 KO'd by basically everything and struggles to do meaningful damage to the remainder of my team, so I'd give it a pass. The other 8 all have great reason to be here, honestly. It is extremely tough to say what will not come between them all. For example, I feel as though Bulu doesn't have the best time, but I could be off base on that. I don't exactly rely on EQ myself, and may appreciate the recovery as much as him. But I don't have the most mons on the ground to take advantage. I have a couple real nice walls to Bulu too, which may force him to rely on coverage like Stone Edge or Superpower, which can be taken advantage of by other members of the team. It could come, but probably doesn't have the greatest matchup here. I need to pick one more. I guess I'll go with Milotic. I could definitely see it coming, what with its performance from week 1 on that Flame Orb Marvel scale set, and it would provide Steve with a great knockoff answer. However, I may not have a great electric type. My grass type is super solid, so I also kind of feel like Steve doesn't want to give the free Leaf Blade against 3 team members. That'd be a lot of pressure on his resists. Haxorus I think looks pretty great. Dragon Stab is so strong when paired with Mold Breaker, Earthquake for Bronzong, plus First Impression for some sick priority, and one Dragon Dance could have it outspeed everything, meaning Steve could go with a bulky spread. It is still relatively slow, or at least slower than my big 3, and maybe Steve will want anything slower than Hydreigon to be a better pivot piece that can tank a couple hits. I don't know. Haxorus is something I either expect and it doesn't come, or I don't expect it and it does come, but I think its unique resistances and the potential bulk of a D-Dance set should push it over the edge in threat level. Crobat is next. I don't think it's the absolute best mon, but as a Kartana switch-in and the ability to taunt Roost with that enormous speed means it can be a great answer to a lot of my problem mons multiple times. Heatran is simply a king. It requires special coverage to try and deal with, and it can sit on most mons in the game all day long. If Bulu comes, it gets that extra recovery too, plus a beautiful partner in defensive crime, and threatens a fire stab that looks a bit problematic for my team. Next, Chad didn't bring Keldeo, but I think Terrakion is even better in this matchup. Rock and Fighting can decimate basically my entire team. I'm interested to see if he's going Scarf for that unstoppable speed, or Band to ensure CC does stupid damage, or something else to switch around moves when I try to tank a hit from him and probably fail. Thundurus-Therian is similar. Electric, Psychic, Grass fighting coverage seems strict, but that's both the totality of Thundy's coverage and everything one would need to hit everything on my team incredibly hard. Similarly curious about the item choice, but this and Terrakion should be claiming at least 1 KO each easily. Finally, I haven't talked about it much yet, but Starmie, I believe, is the best mon for him in the matchup. It outspeeds Kartana and hits my team with stabs, Ice Beam, and or Grass Knot, or Rapid Spin to speed past literally everything. The ability to hit even harder with Analytic or cure itself with the Toxics I just tossed around in week 1. Man, this thing has just the right tools to rip me apart. As for me, Pinsir needs to stay behind again. Steve's team is fast and the switch game becomes that much easier for him as a result. Scarf isn't an easy item to hold in this matchup thanks to those unique typings and resistances that should be coming, so this isn't the matchup for it. Mantine has a rough time too. between Starmie and Thundy with T-Bolt, Terrakion's rock moves, Hex versus physical moves, and the inability to toxic things like Milotic and Crobat. No place for a Manta Ray, same with a Cupcake apparently. Sticky Webs are cleared reliably by his two fastest members, Crobat, which should be able to be max Phys Def already anyways, and Milotic, which can also soak up +6 attacks, and then Calm Mind is liable to be sniped or unable to break through something like Heatran. I really wanted to bring it, but couldn't justify it. The last lot or two were very tough for me to choose again, but strangely enough, I decided to bench my MVPs from week 1, Arcanine and Swampert. Swampert can fall prey to a lot of grass coverage from potentially Tapu Bulu, Starmie, Thundy T, and a special Crobat set which could totally come, or even Solar Beam Heatran, not to mention the sheer power of Close Combat Terrakion and Dragonclaw Hexorus. I wanted to find another way to beat them, and Arcanine will not be the answer either. Intimidate doesn't do too much against Stab of Stone Edge from Terrakion, which outspeeds Arcanine too. Flashfire seems okay for Heatran, but I don't want it to be so telegraphed. Starmie's Hydro Pump, Hexorus Earthquake, Terrakion Stone Edge, there's just a little too much for Arcanine, and not enough that it can do back to quite make the squad. 2 more debuts this week, but the top 3 remain. It was a close call for one of them, but not Torn, who returns with some relatively standard stuff. Boots to stop any chip from rocks going up thanks to Trainer Terrakion. Not sporting Defog this time though, he doesn't exactly have any other hazards, and I suppose this is anticipating no Morgrim as well. I can take advantage of the turns he uses to set up the rocks, or stop them from going up at all with Taunt, a move that could have a lot of utility this time. Crobat Roost, Milotic Recover, Heatran Rocks, Haxorus D-Dance. Maybe the main reason I'm putting it on is in case I need to sack it to +1 Terrakion. I love spamming knockoff, especially in this matchup with this Mon. Steve knows this as well, which may be why he's drafted a Justified Mon for the 2nd straight season. If I knock off, I remove something like a Scarf or Lorb, that's great. The follow-up? I will lose if he is +1 and he gets up a Rock Polish. As I do not like that possibility, I need to be willing to sacrifice Torn to make sure he does not get both a Rock Polish and a +1 to attack. If I'm lucky, his move fails or I skillfully dodge a Stone Edge. Worst case scenario, he doesn't have it and KOs me with Stone Edge anyways, but then I have 3 Mons in the back who outspeed Terrakion at least. Torn could be obviously more important for more than just sacking it to Terrakion's item, such as you turning out and scouting other Scarfs, plus firing off nasty Hurricanes onto things like Tapu Bulu, but I can foresee that situation happening and need to be prepared for it. Speed is for Starmie. Speed creeping, that's speed creep just a little bit in case the Crobat wants to be cheeky, which I think it will be. And otherwise, a lot of bulk is appreciated. We'll see if we can use this a little more effectively this time. Same with the Kartana, which is obviously similar to last and future times. I heavily considered Scarf here. The ability to outspeed things like Starmie and Crobat, plus Scarf Terrakion, and +1 Hexer seemed quite nice. But I also highly value the ability to switch around moves. For example, clicking knockoff on Terrakion and being able to follow up with any of my other moves because I know I'm faster is too good of an opportunity to pass up. Even better, the resist to these moves really cannot switch into the other moves, making knockoff even that much more valuable in the matchup. Crobat and Bulu gets 2 KO'd by Smart Strike, Heatran 2 KO'd by Sacred Sword, Starmie OHKO'd by Leaf Blade or Knockoff while failing to OHKO without a boosting item like Lorb, though I do find that pretty likely. The item is of course to hide Scarf. The Muscle Band is great to bluff an Adamant nature, which I would have to come with a Scarf, and I know Steve will do his calcs, which could be to his detriment this time around. I thought about the Chople Berry, but I didn't want to put my eggs in that basket again. Speaking of, I thought about Chople for Hydreigon again, but opted to actually bring a Scarf this time. His team is fast, so I'd like the ability to outspeed those with the Scarf. Now you might be thinking, where is Dark Pulse? I mentioned previously that with the worst case scenario of Rock Polish Terrakion after the +1, if I Dark Pulse into that, I just lose. No ifs and or buts about it, that's game over, and I'd prefer to avoid that scenario. Instead, Draco is my spammable move, with his resist going down to Earth Power and a couple Flamethrowers, and Dragon Pulse is my backup spammable move. With Dragon as the default move, it does suck having a Scarf. Heatran and Bulu go down so fast to the coverage options, but that Scarf really is valuable, and we'll go over my answer for both of them next. Oh, yeah, the speed again. We can run Modest again to hit a little more consistently. If I were to run Timid, I'd need max speed to ensure I got +1 Haxorus, max speed Modest for +1 Adamant Haxorus. There's all sorts of other speed creeping you could do. Adamant Terrakion, for example, seems like a problem, but I will settle for ensuring I outspeed Crobat, plus another point in case he's creeping at the same spot with something. I don't need too much bulk, but this much at least is pretty nice. New team member alert, Nidoqueen can finally come and may be fighting for its spot on the team. Bulu and Heatran, sign me up. Rocking an AV, it's time to take a hit or two before going down. If I can come in on one of those two, threaten it out with a Sludge Wave or Earth Power respectively, and then grab the follow-up KO thanks to surviving a Psychic from Starmie or Thundy with a T-Bolt or Ice Beam respectively, we're in business. I thought about Substitute for sure as an option. That's what I brought Season 8 with Nidoking against Heatran and Tangrowth, but Steve could be sniffing that out, and I really like the idea of just attacking what's in front of me with the Queen. If Trainer Bulu comes, I have the option to hard switch out of Hydreigon into this, or it's a pretty nice revenge option against either of those two as well. Or nice too if I can get the pivot from Torn into this on Heatran especially. It's a great Bulu check too, as long as we don't swap in on Hornleech, we'll about heal up to full on the coverage move in 2 turns of terrain. Nice synergy there, protecting it from Terracion's EQs as well. The only coverage he's got for Nidoqueen. Lots of special attack to ensure I'm getting this 2-hit KOs and KOs, lots of bulk to complement the EV and natural stats, and the slightest bit of speed creeping because that's the tradition with Steve and I. This one for 8 speed, Heatran. Real simple stuff, so let's go into this unconventional one. By far my favorite part of this set for sure. The mad scientist awoken me for this one. Welcome to fully offensive, especially offensive, Bronzong. Meteor Beam. I kept looking at defensive options for Bronzong, especially for tanking things like Heatran, but things like Starmie, Milotic, and Crobat continuously eluded me. Wouldn't you know it, Meteor Beam, Okos, the Crobat, and Thundy, and then +1 Psychic and Grass Knot can actually go to town on most of the rest of his team. Earthquake is a necessity for Heatran. Even without investment, it's a 2-hit KO on max HP Heatran. The possible result of a quiet-natured Bronzong, 2 KOs, hopefully. We'll see why in a little bit. Max special attack, of course, max HP 2 to go with it, and let it survive a hit or 2, and following that up with Heatproof over Levitate. EQ sucks yet, but who's firing that off? Terrakion CC is barely weaker, 180 base power compared to 200. Haxorus has Mold Breaker, and Heatran's Earth Power is doing just about as much as a Flamethrower would, so no avoiding that, I think. I'd rather try to survive a Heatran Fire Attack if possible. The best answer you've got to this mon, and still benefit from Grassy Terrain Recovery, and also possibly being able to take stray fire coverage moves that are intended for the Kartana. Strange set maybe, but heavily facilitated by the final one in the debut of Jolteon, who may also be playing for a spot on the roster considering what I've got in mind. Still, it's not a bad look, lots of HP yet again, but that's because we don't need much offensive firepower. T-Bolt still 2-hit KOs Starmie and most Melodic, but Taunt Pass, though, is my favorite part of this. I had to come up with this and Bronzong separately, but imagine if you will Jolteon in against, say, Crobat. He's going to hard switch out probably into Thundy, his only real defensive answer aside from maybe Haxorus or Bulu. With those switches I'm forcing, I can grab some momentum, even if he tries to blank an electric attack coming his way. I'm trying to get a screen against Thundy, I'm trying to yawn something out or baton pass on a weak attack. I don't mind sacrificing Jolteon if it means I can get the momentum or a screen up, just to help something like, say, Bronzong. If something falls asleep, it's Bronzong's time to shine. After that, Meteor Beam, ideally under Crobat or Thundurus to 1-hit KO them. Psychic at +1, Okos, Terrakion, and Crobat. Grass Knot 2-hit KOs Melodic and has a chance to Okos Starmie. Blue's 2-hit KO'd by Psychic. Haxorus 2-hit KO'd by Psychic. Thundy I don't even need to Meteor Beam again. It's 2-hit KO'd by Psychic. Earthquake 2-hit KOs Heatran. This is actually a little ridiculous that Bronzong of all things can do this, but we're on the Jolteon, so back to Jolteon though. This is the Facilitator. T-Bolt is decently solid neutral damage anyways, with speed for everything including a speed creeping Crobat, which I think he may do, so it's a nice revenge option too for something like Terrakion or Starmie that doesn't have plus speed. That's the idea at least. I can see this matchup coming down to a couple 50-50s that we need to go in our favor. Steve's team is fearsome. Let's hop in and see what we can do. Good news, we got all 6 correct. Bad news, I picked those because I thought they were his best/scariest 6. No Bulu, and Heatran as the likely lead means Nidoqueen will be best served as the lead. Good luck, have fun to Steve. I am correct. We're just going to go ahead and click that Earth Power button. We've got a little bit of speed if he's very bulky and defensive, and the EV if he's offensive, so I think we're in a pretty good spot for turn 1, especially because he may read us to try and go for rocks or T-Spikes, which we don't have. Earth Power goes off, but the Shaka means that it is not an Okos. It lives on just a few HP and gets up his rocks. That's fine. It's kind of inevitable. Torn was the other possibility to stop the rocks entirely. But honestly, my team doesn't care that much about rocks in the end, especially with boots on Torn, so we may or may not revisit that. Next, though, is he going to stay in with Heatran? An Earth Power seems very easy to predict, meaning that he may switch out. He could also be thinking that this is the turn for me to set down my own rocks. Thinking about it, he's probably expecting me to do that turn 1, but thinking I just got the jump with that damage, I think he's going to think I'm going to get my hazards set up turn 2 instead, potentially. In that case, Starmie, Thundy, or Crobat could come and declare the hazards. I wouldn't mind chip on them, and outspeeding Heatran means I could just finish it off that way too if it stays in. Actually, I could stay in right here and click a button then, huh? Earth Power away. Heatran goes down. 6-5 for the Bouffalant with rocks onto my side of the field that are resisted by 3 members and negated by another. I'd like to think that's a pretty good start, especially when I see the biggest problem on his team come out next. It's that Starmie. You here to take some chip? That's fine by me. I should survive even Life Orb Hydro Pump. I will gladly take all of the damage onto you in exchange. We're going to T-Bolt into the slot. Light Screen. T-Bolt does still look like a 3-hit KO, but okay. A max HP Starmie with Light Screen. That's not what I expected. Man, why do people always have to be bringing screens and stuff against me? It's probably fine. But with Nidoqueen already doing this much damage, I think we can do a little more with it later, considering how healthy it remains and with the EV. And I don't want something else to come in so easily and set up all over me with the screens up. We're going to, I think, hard switch into Torn. That will reveal my boots. And Flip Turn comes out, unsurprisingly, into the Thundurus. Torn's matchup against the Wobbuffets is good, but man, do Tracheon and Thundy scare me from behind the screens. What is Torn even doing against this? He's going to have Thunderbolt, Psychic, probably something like Grass Knot, Focus Blast, maybe a setup move? Well, that's what screens imply, right? I mentioned in the team builder that Tracheon at +1/+2 just kind of wins. Is that also true for Thundy? If it nasty plots and agilities, I may be cooked depending on the coverage moves, and I don't know if I want to risk that if I can help it. He's got to know I have a couple electric immunities too, right? It's risky, but I said I need to be prepared for it. Taunt. And it stops the nasty plot. Ooh, we're being chilling now. That was risky. Next, though, is going to be another potentially risky switch, but if screens are up, I need to be able to stall them a little bit or keep momentum going at the very least, so I'm going to go Jolteon next. Just U-turn out real quick into Jolteon on the T-Bolt. Heal back up from the Rocks chip. Don't reveal the lefties either. Everything is going our way so far. I'm sure he's aware we don't exactly threaten him at this point, so I'd expect him to stay in and get some chip. We're going to Yawn to stop him from, say, setting up once the taunt wears off, which will be very soon. Yawn as we are faster, that's good. And he misses the Focus Blast, which is very fortunate. And assuming he's got Psychic for Nidoqueen, I think we've got the full set. We're going to, of course, Baton Pass out for the relatively safe switch priority, because we know that he's going to have to switch from Yawn. He actually goes to Haxorus, a very sturdy electric resist. I've got... Well, I don't have much. With the light screen up, I don't have fantastic answer to the Haxorus. Hydreigon does have a shot to OHKO with Draco, actually, but at what cost? I really do not want to give anything else a chance to set up, and we know light screen is up, and Draco's just begging to let that happen. Not to mention a Scarf from him would be devastating. Torn could, of course, stop a setup, but that's kind of it. That would be the safest play, potentially. Queen could get OHKO'd, and Ice Beam doesn't do much through the screens. Bronzong cannot set up on this. And as we see on the screen before you, I had to ask the question, what is Kartana's usefulness in this match? Starmie outspeeds, but it isn't offensive, so maybe that's a good thing. Crobat is here specifically for the card, of course. Thundy is set up and can probably OHKO us easily with any special move that he's running. Terrakion, I'm convinced, is going to be that Rock Polish set, so potentially being able to hit that would be nice, but if your Rock Polish is on a switch, that's not going to work. The Haxorus in front of me would need close combat to OHKO, which it probably has, but the knockoff that may be coming first could still be worth it. I don't exactly see this as the match where Cart snowballs out of control, so I would like to ensure we can actually do something about the Haxorus in front of us by clicking knockoff to at least do damage, potentially remove a Scarf or something if we can take a hit potentially. We are just going to click the knockoff button and try and get something out of this Haxorus so he doesn't set up all over us. Does over 2/3, removes a Lorb, implying D-Dance set up our 4 attacks, and we do indeed just go down to a close combat that is 5-5, with Kartana going down without a KO yet again. That is unfortunate, but I would like to point something out about his team. With Heatran down and Bulu absent, this is the exact scenario I knew Hydreigon would be able to thrive in. Draco Meteor is set up bait, of course, but what about Dragon Pulse, eh? That seems like a pretty good idea. There are very few mons on his side that can actually outspeed me, let alone KO me in one hit as well. Terrakion on Thundy sure can. Maybe Starmie if it has Ice Beam, but with a Dragon Pulse this turn, we can at least ensure great damage onto something. Maybe a surprise KO with the Scarf too. We're just going to click the Dragon Pulse button. Haxorus, thank goodness the big threat is down 5-4. Steve's team is just filled with threats though, man, because you know what's next. It's going to be the Terrakion in for free on the Switch. I already said I was convinced of Rock Polish, but how devastating would Scarf be here? I don't think it matters, though. If it's Scarf, I know it's locked in, and I can at least get an attack in now that these screens are down with some, like, Nidoqueen, maybe an Ice Beam into a Flying type that would switch in, or Electric to try and catch the Starmie. Either way, the worst case scenario is him setting up, so I need to threaten the damage right here, and now we're going to click Dragon Pulse. We do hit first, bring him below half, and instead of CC, yep, he sure does set up the Rock Polish. No time to pat myself on the back for that one. This is the real test. What does he do now? Sword Stance or Close Combat probably seem to be the most likely. I think he's going to need 3 attacking moves to hit everything I have. Stone Edge for Torn, Earthquake for Nidoking, CC for probably something like Cart, which means we may just know his entire moveset. At +1 or +2 from Sword Stance, he would just win. We have talked about this before. However, without all those coverage moves, he loses to something on my side, right? Plus, Stone Edge can miss, right? So here's the decision. I can stay in with Hydreigon and attack again. I do threaten the KO, and it would prevent him from setting up any further. Or I can sack something else for Nidoqueen to come in, take a hit, and KO back. And what would I sack? The Bronzong plan seems odd at best. With multiple flying types left, it could actually work. Jolteon doesn't exactly seem poised to deal damage, especially with Cart down, meaning Crobat is less useful for him. But he does have 2 fast electric weaknesses left, And once Terrakion goes down, that light screen actually looks amazing. Nidoqueen needs to be the revenge killer. Torn can mess that Starmie a good bit, especially if he gets in ahead of it, and Taunt can continue to put in work stopping Roost from Crobat, screens from Starmie, Nasty Plot from Thundy, things like that. Ultimately, though, my decision came down to sacking Torn or staying in with Hydreigon. I took my full time with this decision. Timer going down to the wire, which we'll go over later, but ultimately, I decided not to switch and let Hydreigon go down. I think it came down to the potential for Stone Edge to miss Torn, which I think wouldn't have mattered if I'd swapped in with full health, or after CC anyways, and that I just did not want to risk him setting up again, as Steve could see this as a potential Hail Mary play, despite me staying in on his setup multiple times already. We'll revisit it, obviously, for sure, but for now, it will come down to Nidoqueen the tank. Yes, it's early in the game, but it does still come down to this. At full health, even Adamant Earthquake will not KO me, while we're guaranteed the KO back with Earth Power. I did consider using a different move. It wouldn't surprise me if Steve tried to save the Terrakion, but I did click Earth Power. Thankfully, we do not get crit, and we are able to KO back with Earth Power. Thank goodness. That is the Terrakion down 4-3 with most of Steve's offense eliminated. Finally. His answer, of course, will be the Starmie again. It obviously threatens with both stabs, but also we kind of have a good, decent idea of what might happen. I don't mind just clicking T-Bolt again. We will, of course, get it down to less than a third after the light screen goes up yet again. Nidoqueen has done over 200% this match, really carrying the weight here. The switches are obvious, but we're going through with them. I actually am going to go into Jolteon this time as he flip turns into the Thundurus, because I know that Jolteon is less valuable with the Thundurus around, and more importantly, it will draw it in every single time. Sort of wishing I had something like Toxic instead of Yawn, but being able to force this out is still pretty nice. Additionally, though, Crobat is probably sporting Heat Wave for Cart. The light screen looks pretty magnificent now, considering all three of these are probably special attackers then. Up it is going to go finally this turn. Let's heal up a little bit, and it will help us eat up that Psychic pretty darn well. Also, we do know that that is a Life Orb now, too, which is pretty useful information, too. The previous chip from U-Turn, now we see 10% chip from Life Orb. We are going to click Yawn next. That is going to help make sure that whatever comes in next isn't going to be eating big hits compared to the hits I want Jolteon to be taking, but he actually goes straight into the Starmie. I kind of like this play a lot from him. Could have been a straight baton pass turn for us. Instead, we actually have a turn to think about this now, don't we? He could very easily flip turn out and avoid falling asleep, but if so, we do outspeed, and obviously we're going to KO if that's the case. But he wouldn't let that happen, right? Unfortunately, he would let that happen. I'm going to baton pass out into Bronzong, and he actually stayed in, so he could flip turn out himself and goes into the Crobat. Actually took a little bit of chip too, which is a little bit unfortunate. We will talk about that a little bit later too, about the possibility of KOing it there and what to do with Bronzong, but I kind of figured he wasn't going to stay in, and that Bronzong, even if he did stay in, would be able to take a hit and KO no matter what too, because Meteor Beam, even behind the light screen, was going to KO. And similarly here, Meteor Beam should be able to do half his health pretty easily, and then a follow-up Psychic will KO, not to mention the max HP investment Starmie has. Again, that should go down to Meteor Beam too, if he cheekily wanted to go back into that, or of course we can slam it with the Grass Knot. So here we go, we're going to Meteor Beam away. He Nasty Plots, I didn't think he'd actually do that, but here we go. And blam! 49%, my calcs show. Max HP Crobat should be taking 49.7 minimum, which should round to 50. Does he have Spadef investment? That doesn't make much sense. That's about the stat I thought he'd invested when Cart needed to be checked, and Torn needs to be outsped. No matter, even the Black Sludge, even with that taking into account, the follow-up Psychic should be doing a minimum of 56%, so this will be the knockout Heat Wave. We didn't realize at the time, but with Infiltrator and Heatproof Sector does solid damage, and Psychic leaves him with 1%. Does he really have Spadef? After the match, we did exchange lineups. Not only did he not have investment, the percentages were just weird rounding errors, and Bronzong got, I kid you not, 2 consecutive 1 in 16 rolls, which left him at exactly 1 HP. That is a 1 in 256 chance of not KOing the Crobat in those 2 moves. That's actually kind of insane. We'll talk later about that, of course, and how it affects the match afterwards. But, of course, for now, he is just going to get in one more Heat Wave before Bronzong takes him down with a Psychic as well. And that is going to be 4-2 my ways. But the ways to KO the Thundurus, which, of course, is going to be what comes in next, are dwindling, considering this. And Nidoqueen get taken out by T-Bolt and Psychic, respectively, and Jolteon cannot touch it. We're really relying on that Life Orb chip right now, I think, which means I'm going to have to stay on this guy as he T-Bolts. No, Focus Blast, which was there to cover the Jolteon switch. That's pretty fortunate for him that it hit, because otherwise that would have been a hefty, probably mineral, a psychic, that would have brought him well below 50%. We'll talk about that later again, but for now it is a 3-2 match, but I do not feel great about it, of course. Jolteon, of course, needs to come in to tank a hit or two from Life Orb Thundy, and now for another decision point. He could try and go Starmie and bait out an electric move for me. Doing so could restore HP on Thundy from Volt Absorb. Doing so, however, would be very risky, as him being down to 1 Mon would allow me to actually yawn incredibly effectively. He could also attack me here. A Focus Blast will KO me without a screen up, though he has to actually hit. Finally, he could set up. At +2, he KOs everything but risks me clicking Yawn. In my mind, I can either Yawn, which punishes Nasty Plot or Switch, or I can Light Screen, which punishes an attack and maybe a Switch. That would probably put us into another 50-50. We'll talk about this decision again later probably, but I decided on this turn to Light Screen. I want to make sure my team lived his attacks. More importantly, I want to try to get more Life Orb chip on him. However, he did read that happening, and the Light Screen does happen, but he does click the Nasty Plot, which means his next Focus Blast can still KO, and we're not getting more Life Orb chip as recoil either. I now have two options. They are now to either Yawn, to force him out next turn, or to Switch, sacking probably the Nidoqueen to get a little more chip, but that really doesn't accomplish that much either, especially because we have the Light Screen up for only 4 turns. Maybe I could then go into Torn and get U-Turn chip 2, baiting another attack, but what does that do what I need it to? That would make it pretty close at that point, so to me the easy decision here is just to Yawn, even knowing he could Switch but not expecting it. Yawn is going to go off, of course, and he is of course going to click Focus Blast, and Jolteon is going to go down. That is 2-2 at this game here too. This was potentially another point where I could have swapped out as well, but that's fine. This is a play that has the same outcome basically no matter what. He is going to be sacking Starmie here to something. If I want Nidoqueen, I Sludge Wave and take it out, or in this case, I am just going to go into Torn, click U-Turn. He obviously has to switch because of Yawn, and we're going to do that. Thundy would come in afterwards, even if I were to take it out with Nidoqueen and Revenge anyways, because I have him threatening the Ice Beam. So we're just going to go down to the 1v1 situation with him at 50% health. Thoughts are racing through my mind. I wish I had Hydreigon in this situation instead of Torn. Oh boy, I do. Do I have him to knock off twice? Or do I Hurricane first? Or do I Hurricane second? 1v1. Genie versus Genie. But his does have the advantage, of course, in typing because of the electric type. I have Light Screen up for 1 more turn. Thank goodness Jolteon timed the screens that way. On this, the penultimate turn of the battle, barring crit, it's going to click T-Bolt. So what's it going to be for me? From my calcs, knockoff into knockoff is a roll. Not in my favor, most likely. That means I'm going to have to hit a Hurricane to win. Maybe I could hit Hurricane first, try and get the confusion. But the odds of a knockoff crit or high roll seem a little safer than trying to get the confusion. I've taken some flack for hyping up Torn so much. It's going to come down to this, though. If Hurricane hits, I win. If it misses, I lose. That's going to have to be what it comes down to. Okay, well, we're going to click Knock first. Knockoff will, of course, bring it in range. It's nice damage there. T-Bolt doesn't KO. But it does paralyze. Oh, the 10% chance to paralyze me. We don't even get to find out if Hurricane was going to hit with the paralysis. Thundy now outspeeds. And we are going to fall 1-0. GG to Steve, well played, man, but come on. The easy math shows a 63% chance to win with 2 turns left, avoid the 10% para, and then hit the 70% Hurricane. But I pointed out spots in the battle we need to revisit. Could I have played better? Well, the answer is obviously and probably always yes, but which bits actually mattered? Lots of really good plays early, staying in on Mons, and good early pivoting from the Jolt, but otherwise, how was the sack of Cart? Honestly, probably for the best. I don't think I had another better way to ensure damage on Haxorus to get in range of everything else, especially when I was expecting at least 1 Scarf in there. The first real and probably most significant decision point was the sacking of Hydreigon over Tornadus. I do think the argument was probably to sack Torn at that point instead of Hydreigon, but what Torn did at the end, it was just so much riskier than Hydreigon, who also outsped everything he had left, but was more susceptible to the light screen Steve was prioritizing with this army. If all else was equal, Hydreigon obviously would have won the endgame by itself if it were there instead of Torn. Spamming Dragon Pulse would have done it, but would that have really happened? Obviously, we cannot say for sure. To be totally honest, I think it was probably the correct play to make, though. Still, obviously, we don't know exactly what would need to happen. Say Starmie got in, survived a hit, and was able to get up Light Screen. Let's say the Thundurus wasn't in range of a Dragon Pulse either. Or knowing Steve, I think he'd be smart enough to be able to keep something out of range in order to be able to hit back. Though, of course, saving something like Thundy would have it come down to Focus Blast. There are so many what-if scenarios that could have taken place, but that's fine. We don't need to go through all those rabbit holes. We're going to go down just a couple that I had already prepared ahead of time. You don't need to thank me. As I said, though, he needed those 3 moves for coverage on the Trachian. He needed Rock, he needed Fighting, and he needed Ground. And that means he only had the one setup move, the one that we already saw. That simply leads me to believe it would be impossible for him to set up any further than he had with a Sword Stance, and he was just going to attack what was in front of him. That said, it should have just been the Torn that was sacked, as Hydreigon was going to go on a rampage once that was down, so long as it didn't let it light screen up again. I did, of course, with Nidoqueen, but we could stall that out pretty well with the Jolteon and Bronzong, as we did. Dragon Pulse was just going to start claiming some KOs at some point. Most importantly, I needed to better identify how to do damage to Thundurus. Torn obviously was not the best answer to it, which allowed Steve to get the 10% pair at the end, but did it have to be Hydreigon to do it? For example, let's say I was able to get Bronzong in against Thundy with the light screen up, or even just against the Starmie a little bit earlier, which might have been nice. Meteor Beam KOing it would have just opened the game up just as much, if not better. That +1 Bronzong actually could have just swept him away if he took care of the Thundy, and we saw the power rolls against Crobat, and without light screen or having to use the slightly weaker Meteor Beam first, that would have done it. Wouldn't have made more sense, for example, to sack Jolteon or turn early to the Thundy to get light screen up, just so Bronzong would have an opening with the Meteor Beam. Even against Starmie, Bronzong would have been able to Meteor Beam pretty freely. After the second T-Bolt into it, Starmie was low enough that even with the screen, Meteor Beam would have KO'd, not even mentioning him swapping into something else weak to it to tank the hit. Heck, that turn where I yawned on the switch into Starmie, I said we talked about that a little bit. I think that was incredibly easy to predict. That was the turn where had I baton passed out, instead of clicking yawn, I could have either KO'd the Starmie earlier with Torn U-turning into Bronzong, or simply sent in Bronzong for the Meteor Beam KO, or I guess the ultimate point of this thought exercise is that I did just find 2 ways in which I could have a much more guaranteed win. Well, Meteor Beam can miss, of course, or Bronzong could get crit, of course, but he also could miss or hit his Focus Blasts, instead of relying on Torn at the end. Yes, I think I should have sacked Torn instead of Hydreigon. No, that in and of itself was not the game-losing move. It may have been relatively close, but that's fine. The Bronzong play, though, should be identified as well. Not just a possible attempt to bring it on Thundy or Starmie, but the rolls as well. Let's say everything else equal, we didn't get literally the worst possible rolls on Crobat, and we 2-hit KO'd it, not taking the second +2 Heat Wave. In that case, Thundy would need to come in again, of course. Starmie would get KO'd by the Grass Knot, and if it were to come in, and even if it got a light screen, that would leave Thundy alone to get yawned for a Nidoqueen victory. And then what? Steve went for Focus Blast that turn, and hit, by the way, 30% chance opening for us to win, because he was anticipating the Jolteon. I just wanted to sack the Bronzong, as it couldn't exactly come back in later to do anything else. But healthier? Focus Blast would not have KO'd me, actually. After just one Heat Wave, I would have survived a Focus Blast from that Thundy, which means we would have had a 50-50 instead. Bronzong could stay in, or I could switch to Jolteon, and he could either T-Bolt or Focus Blast. If he T-Bolts as I stay in, the same result happens. We move on to the 63% chance to win at the end of the game. If he T-Bolts as I switch to Jolteon, we at least have a whole nother Mon to potentially sack and or threaten him with later. Imagine the mind games later with Bronzong being healthy enough to take a hit, or if I got a light screen up to let Zong take 2 hits, 2 Life Orb recoil turns, putting it in range of Torn's knock at the end, or at least get the odds better by not having to click Hurricane. If, for example, we were to end in the same scenario at the very end of the match, Thundy versus Nidoqueen on the third to last turn, except I had Bronzong as well, we could potentially force at least another 10% damage and Life Orb recoil to him. If we were to maneuver it to get another 10%, that would have put him in range of the final knockoff. Heck, even just another 10% would have been in range of the second knockoff, which means we would have needed to be parried there, which we were, instead of having to rely on Hurricane, which, ends up coming out the same, just because of the way things happened. But it would have been a whole lot better odds. Going back to healthier Bronzong versus Thundy. If he went for Focus Blast, as he did this time, as I switched, Jolteon would go down. That was kind of the point of why he did it in the first place, and it would have been basically game over, as I don't have screens for his hits nor yawn to stop him. I can't take a hit at all. Finally, though, if he Focus Blast as I stayed in, I would have survived, hit Thundy for more than half, and either taken him down or made him succumb to Life Orb, the same situation as if he had missed in the original scenario. That would be a GG. So that's a pretty intense 50-50 that would have emerged, but I don't think we can say for sure what would have happened there. As much as I would like to say I got screwed by the 1 in 256 that let Crobat survive, I think it would be very tough to guarantee that, so I'll simply have to move on. The only other thing I've got is T-bolting the Starmie on the turn after I yawned it, when it flip turned out, but Starmie didn't do anything else all game. To be fair, getting that KO would have been pretty huge to allow Yawn to go off too, so I think that probably could have won me the game as well. But with Thundy potentially getting healthy, I'm overall relatively comfortable making the play that I did, though maybe I shouldn't underestimate what Bronzong could have done to it. Actually, that's about it for the match. In the end, we've got a total of these, keeping Hydreigon in against Trachion. not getting Bronzong against Thundy or Starmie earlier, clicking T-Bolt against Starmie, Focus Blast hitting and KOing Bronzong, and the 10% paralysis on Torn, plus of course the 70% chance to hit a Hurricane, along with the potential consequences of a 1 in 256 roll. What were the most impactful? Not sacking Torn, I think. Those 2 turns around the Starmie late, where I think I could have easily predicted it switching in and then it flip turning slowly out of the on. Those probably make a lot of sense there too. Plus, of course, Focus Blast hitting Bronzong were the ones that come to mind that would have 100% won the game for me. We could talk about things like, is Focus Blast not hitting Jolteon earlier? Earthquake critting the Nidoqueen could have won the game for him, of course, probably right then and there. We'll stick to these for now. Forcing in Bronzong could be risky. Potentially Baton passing into a big move like Focus Blast into a T-Bolt would not have been tanked particularly comfortably, and Meteor Beam missing would probably have in game 2, but I'd still be comfortable with just giving that a 90% chance to win. Hitting Meteor Beam onto Thundy would have been game. Finally, the para. Yeah, sacking Torn instead of Hydreigon would have won me the game probably. And yes, Bronzong Meteor Beaming the Thundy probably would have won me the game. What did they really do to me? They put me in the endgame scenario we saw, where I had a 63% chance to win. So what screwed me more? Multiple different plays that reduced my chance of winning, probably all together, by 37%, or the miss/para, the latter of which happened, that lowered my winning chance from 63% to 0%. I made quite a few great plays throughout, I believe. Nidoqueen Earth powering the first 2 turns, the Torn taunt, the Jolteon switch after, the Kartana knock of Haxorus, Hydreigon getting chip on Turrak, keeping Queen healthy to revenge, the timing of Bronzong and the pivoting of Jolteon weren't ideal, but they were pretty good. I don't think I can afford to beat myself up about not optimally sacking Torn to keep Hydreigon alive, or playing the Jolteon better to allow Bronzong to get in against Thundy, but I know I also cannot be too riled up about my bad luck in a children's game deciding my fate in a passion project. In the end, as I always say, GG to Steve. You played well, man, and I always love facing off against you. Before closing, I'd like to give a quick shout out to, of course, the MVP, Nidoqueen, who did over 200% damage and got a pair of KOs, including clutching it out against Terrakion, though the damage and sacrifices of teammates like Kartana and Hydreigon were super clutch as well. That's going to do it for this week. We are 1-1 with a +2 differential after facing what may have been the 2 best coaches in the league after us, so we're going to have to be happy with that. Next up, a matchup against my boy Sasbo, and it's 1-1 Boulder Boulders. See ya.